Well, hi, everyone. Welcome to this segment where we feature what we think are one of the best healthcare and venture investors globally. Super excited to be chatting with Qi. He's the partner at CentreGold Capital. Qi, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Kyle. Glad to be here.
The context to give the audience a little bit more background of why we're doing this interview. Qi and CentreGold Capital is an early stage investor and at the early stages of healthcare. And what's super impressive is Qi is absolutely on the ground, has to understand the healthcare ecosystem in and out. He knows innovative things before anybody else does. And this approach is probably one of the most riskiest approach in venture, going pre-seed and early seed and seed stages. And the fact that he's taken that on and it's done quite well in it, it's really impressive. And so super excited to have Qi here and recognize you as an amazing healthcare venture investor. So Qi, I think the best way to start is just maybe tell the audience who is CentreGold Capital, what do you guys invest in, what assets under management, your focus areas?
Yeah, of course. First of all, thank you very much again. To invite me over, and it's such a great pleasure. So just a quick nutshell. CentreGold Capital, we just had our second fund. We're with total about 75 million AUM across two funds. And initially, at our first fund, we started with consumer and digital health. So on our second fund, we just added a B2B partner, and it sounds like we're covering most of the areas in today's fundable sectors. So, but how we see that is that each of our sector focused team, they just do build their own theses. For example, like in B2B, we spend a lot of times. Our B2B partners spend a lot of time in SaaS and Industry 4.0. And in consumer, they spend a lot of time in marketplaces, startup that founded by talented operators, right? Because a lot of times in marketplace you're just fighting for margins and trying to match supply and demand. And whereas in my team, I spend most of the time, in healthcare and focusing any software and data related products to mainly address three core challenges in today's healthcare ecosystem. One is care accessibility. How do a solution helping whether the disease community or group or patient to get better care by leveraging the technology to match the supply and demand. And the second is physician burnout. How do any solution to help physician to be able to treat more patient and help hospital make more revenue will also make patient happier by either whether by increasing their patient engagement or making sure they're updated with their disease progression and so on and so forth. And the last one is payment transparency. As we know, healthcare expenses accounts for like 30+% of GDP or 20+%, and a lot of disease and conditions are not well covered. There's a multiple could be due to multiple reasons, and I can give you more example later on. About some of the stuff like mental health we've been diving into. Yeah.
You talked about a couple different categories that you would like to focus on. Why did you pick those categories?
Yeah. Essentially, those are the three biggest topic in the market, and then when we break it down, there's a lot of things nowadays people are trying to evaluate from the deeper tech perspective, rather leveraging digital biomarkers and creating new biomarkers and so on and so forth. Besides that, we also realize, providing the care to the people who needs by leveraging, technology not only to automating the standard care already existing, but also trying to save some of the, the practitioners' time by, for example, when we're talking about tech-enabled services in healthcare, we already seeing some of the good players in the market like Omada, Livongo, that they automating the care process and then leveraging the practitioners' time for the last mile efforts. That itself, the whole technology is not about rocket science. It's about leveraging the currently available devices and the mobile infrastructure, and also physician facing portals and practitioner facing portals. I think those are the great things that there is not a lot of tech development, but you can actually transform or upgrade the existing healthcare infrastructure to a certain degree. And then that was just one example. We also see people doing that in other areas, let's say pediatric care, to mental health and so on and so forth. I think there's a lot of things you could do by taking that approach. Yep.
Yeah, no, it's actually interesting because it seems like it's hard to just completely change the healthcare, workflows, processes, existing tools that providers are used to working with, and being able to say, how do you just improve the infrastructure? And that, I think, is a great way to look at it. Yeah.
Right. Because if you look into it, I actually nothing has really been changed. It's just everything's become more digitalized. And then that being said, you can find out more ways to automating the standard of care, and then by create remote patient monitoring and continuous monitorings, that having both physician and the patient to be transparent with their disease progression, and essentially at the end of the day, you still need someone to come in to make decision. But at that time, you already help them to be able to see more patients, to be able to deliver a better care. But at the same time, patients are being able to engaged to be self-management, but be part of the self-management, and more, to be more involved, to be more responsible, for all the stakeholders and other parties through the platforms.
Yeah, totally. I agree. I think what's really interesting though is, as for you as an early stage investor, when we chatted pre-pandemic, by the way, you're hitting the pavement. You're always at a variety of different events, always in the know of pretty early stage tech, and it's pretty cool. And I think that's probably the harder route to go, but that's necessary in the stage that you're focused on. And I'm curious, because you are pre-seed, seed stage, when you invest in a healthcare company, are you looking at something that's supposed to be more moonshot, or are you still trying to think about what's practical for the healthcare ecosystem?
Yeah, it's that's a tricky question, because as a venture investor or seed investor, always goes for the moonshot, because that's when you expect probably a lot of company gonna fail along the ways. But I guess in healthcare, moonshot doesn't really translate into reality. Pre-seed and seed are definitely more risky. And then when talking about healthcare, digital health is also slightly different than medical device or biotech, which you see, a lot of barrier to entry to start a company. In those other two spaces, pretty high, so success rates are slightly higher in terms of, fundraising or exit before they even started commercializing, right? And then digital health, just because the industry is very new and we're still trying to figure out where, things are going to go out. And then, as I mentioned before, because of the barrier to entry it's a slightly lower, so we do see more competitions, especially at the seed stage. And then how you're going to weed it out, the noises are very important. And in terms of the disease category, because of the competition, and it could to potentially make it hard to of course, going after a bigger market is definitely something we prefer to see. But what I'm also trying to say, there are also unmet needs that are currently out of the market. You might not gonna see it as a super big market, but it's also a very strong unmet need. At the same time, when competition it's not super fierce, and being one or two player in the sector can pretty much still create decent outcomes.
Yeah, I think it's a weird space, because moonshots, you probably think more on the, we were talking with a couple different other individuals, and when you say moonshot, it's more as like research versus breakthrough, move the needle completely
Right.
up over this. And it's hard. This healthcare ecosystem, it's rigid, it's regulated, it's hard. Providers
Yeah.
are difficult to work with. You can't just say, screw it, let's break it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. When you want to do moonshots, probably the FDA and the doctors are not gonna like that terms.
Right. Right.
When you're really trying to put it into patients' hands. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the interesting thing. It's kind of like, especially for you, I suppose it's this weird mix of thing. Is this company going to get to a level where it can really scale quickly, but at the same time still be like work with the healthcare ecosystem? And I think that's
Right.
I mean, that's what you do. I mean, that's what you're betting on. That's where you know how to call the shots, and that's what makes you, I think, great in the stage that you're in. Um, I'm curious, when you actually decide to invest in a healthcare company in early stages, do you like to focus more on like diseases or chronic issues and focus on like
Um,
verticals, or do you like to do more platform plays, or both?
got it. Yep. So I'd say we do spend more time to look into platform and the care type, as I mentioned before, to when we do look at patient facing solutions, because if you're talking about diseases and conditions, uh, you know which we're not really restrict ourselves into, because coexisting with several conditions are very, very common, right? And I do believe care type is actually a pretty good approach, where we're consistently interviewing stakeholders, patients, to see what are the challenges they really see, right, in the sector, and then to see what are the solutions or startup out there, to take the active approach when we deal with deal sourcing, and when we trying to recognize more companies that addressing those problems. For example, mental health maybe has been pretty popular, pretty hot lately, right? Like and we started looking at space back in 2018, just because some personal like anxiety, depression issues, and accessibility became like a huge problem to myself. And then even though in today's mental health environment, after we're seeing this develop and accelerate during COVID, but there's still a lot of stuff we need to think first. For example, therapy, a lot of therapies, they think they're not making enough money. A lot of the money goes into operation stuff, and reimbursement are really low to mental health. Maybe because payers think it's a type of operation, unlike primary care or surgeons, you have to put a lot of cost into equipment, tools, and the rentals. But in mental health, you probably you're just yourself with a pen and paper, probably some SaaS platform, that's all, right? And that also maybe because of clinically people don't think it has generated enough evidence to say people deserve a better reimbursement for the mental health, and then it causes to some certain problem to a patient that they have to pay a lot of out of pocket, or they don't really even know what's their current reimbursement policy with the payers they're using, private payers they're using. And I think those are all the things we are consistently trying to get smarter, and also exploring startup. Either we've already funded, or we haven't funded, and taking that type of approach to sourcing deals, or to continue our research. That's the first criterion when we're thinking about investment. And the second is about the team. Right, the team itself is important. In seed stage, you pretty much invest 80% of stuff you're looking into is whether directly related to the team, or because they're a great team, so they get to this and this and this, right? And and we do, when we do bottom up approach, we find the good teams first, and then we try to figure out what they do, and then we talk to, you know, again, interviews is important. We also have, our own team that come from a variety of backgrounds, and to see why, they want to focus on the type of care they're going after, and what either the clinical expertise or the product expertise, to commercialize this if the problem they're targeting requires certain level of, integration into primary cares or into, specialties, practitioners' offices and so on and so forth.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's funny that you talk about, I mean, especially in your stage, a majority of your investment decision is going to be based off of the team, because it's so early stage. And it's interesting because healthcare is such a unique field where a lot of people come into it because they have some type of personal issue. That could have been they had a rare disease, or it could have been they were faced with a life or death situation, or it was maybe one of their family members who had something like that. Do you, I mean, I'm assuming you probably see that quite a bit then. A lot of personal reasons why people come into this industry.
Yeah.
I think, well, I want to switch gears real quick, and I want to talk about your investment portfolio and highlight some of the companies you're on the board of, because you have Virgo, which we're actually, Matt is a part of the conference. He's talking. We're highlighting him because
nice.
Awesome company.
Matt is awesome.
It's incredible. You have Golly Health. You have Circadia Health. Impressive, really cool companies. And I'm just curious, like, why did you maybe, and you could talk about a couple, I know you have more healthcare portfolios, but I think you're on the board of those companies specifically. I'm just curious, maybe for one or all of them, why did you make those investments? Like, what was something that you saw in those companies?
Yeah, it depends how much time we have. So again, a quick nutshell, they're all addressing, at least one of the three core problems, we love to see, as discussed at the very beginning, whether if we're talking about, Virgo, that facilitating a better decision making, a process amongst the commercial, providers that have in the GI sightings, create a very great, video recording systems and initially for education purpose, because currently just the only single digit % of videos being recorded, and they're doing some great work to utilize that untapped resources to create a better, environment from both, patient and the provider side, and potentially, having insurance companies on board to work more within the ecosystem. And the Golly Health incorporating, both clinical and environmental insights, helping not only the IBD patient, which we know, they suffering on day-to-day basis, and after, we spoke with a lot of IBD patient, skins and diarrhea, skin issues, diarrhea, and mental. Those are the things they have to face on daily basis. And so those solutions helping them to better self-manage their symptoms, but also, enable to create, like as you mentioned before, a platform to enable multiple stakeholders to be engaged, that we've never seen before, and whether I can't really tell about how it's going to be done, like at current stage, but I'm super hyped about it. And one last one is the Circadia. They're on the other hand that fit into the mainstream of so-called RPM, remote patient monitoring, a trend, targeting a specific vital sign, which is a respiratory patterns. Unlike the ones we've seen on day-to-day basis, blood pressure, hypertension, and diabetes, and actually respiratory rate, it's something we believe that hasn't been overlooked in the past, which means whether in clinical settings or at home basis, people haven't taken that serious look into it, which if you have asthma, you have any, respiratory diseases, it could accelerate within like 2 to 3 hours. If you put the solution into patient hands, whether either on site or at home. You can save practitioners a lot of efforts, and giving them real insights into the action items, and giving people at home or high risk patient at home a way to alert the care team around them ahead of time, if in the long term the predictive analysis become more mature. But of course getting the data is very important. And of course that's just from the application layer. Again, the great team comp and track record is another thing we look into. Rather, as I mentioned before, Matt, he's a super awesome. He has a great product experience from Intuitive Surgical before, and has co-founders from with video and a camera, related data engineering experience, and as well as EHR experience. And so as Fairs, the CEO at Circadia, who is I've also been seen as a great operator and a savvy product guy. Yep.
I mean, yeah, really cool deals. I mean, both Circadia, they seem like they're on that trend of being able to monitor patients without having to connect with anything, being able to give them that flexibility. They're not going to be monitored in an invasive way. And then you have Golly Health, who's got an incredible health management tool that is pretty intuitive. And then yeah, I won't even talk about Virgo because Matt will talk about it himself later. It's pretty cool. Really impressive, man. I'm curious to get your thoughts on this, because you're super early stage, and you have conversations at a much earlier through that ideation phase to trying to make it into commercial product. And I'm curious, when you approach any form of care, how do you know what is the right tool to use? Whether it's an application, whether it's a device, whether it should come directly from the provider. I mean, there's so many different types of care that I'm really throwing you a big question.
Yeah.
How do you figure that out?
Yeah, the definition of the right tool, I think is very broad, as you mentioned. It really depends if we're talking about a patient-facing application or clinical grade software used by practitioners. I just say, when we look into it, first of all, we want to see the purpose of this, and if it wants to be automated and integrated, and then who use the tools and why would they use tools, right? Like if you're talking about patient tool facing tools, engagement is absolutely important. When today I would say a majority of the tools out there, people only cares about engagement, like especially in digital health space, because not a lot of studies or evidence and have been shown, because a lot of solutions targeting chronic disease patient, and this is a long, very, very long journey, a decade, 2 decades, to really see, back in the days when we put software and healthcare combined together into patient-facing mobile applications, did it work, right? Now, like, nobody knows, and the only thing people care is engagement. People just fully, believe that when the patient more engaged, they're more involved, engaged with the content, involved with the content, and that means, they would learning more, absorbing more, and listening more. And only if your application design in a good manner, patient friendly, they'll be willing to engage more, right? So engagement being like one single metric nowadays is very important. So that's the one metric that we love to look into. And a lot of questions actually ask the patient, well, that we ask, it's whether the company could be doing the right thing, or they might go into like different directions, even though if it's on a proof of concept stage. And but just by looking at the tools based on what we're looking into, what we've seen in the past, and a lot of conclusion, a lot of skepticism could be made. Like why, let's say when there's a one app that without offering a very strong, value proposition, just questionnaires after question after question after 40 questionnaires, and then patient, if I'm using testing the application and I don't really know what I'm getting out of that, apparently that's a red flag for me, right? Like that means you're not being able to generate like a patient engagement. And then later on, we would discuss with the founders, what are you trying to build? How do you trying to build it, right? And then that could be one indication they're on the right track to the right tool or not, right? And then when we talk about the practitioner side, it really boils down to the return investment, right? And both to the physicians, do you enable them to have more time while delivering better quality of care to the patient, or are you being able to help hospitals to generate more revenue, the ROI from monetary side, and if you do get let's say get practitioner engaged, even though patients are super happy with their app, but does that mean you actually save time for physicians, and is it actually easy to use? Do you really is that really something like rocket science? You have to teach physicians, and like taking them weeks to before they even started to testing it, take them weeks to understand how this works, because essentially again, we're dealing with people's life, right? The physician is not going to be like I'm going to try to use it as long as it sounds good to me, right? They have to really understand and being really to be responsible to their patient's life. Yeah.
Interesting. I like how you highlighted, the important aspects, both from the patient side, but then also what providers are looking for, what makes sense for both. And from that, you can kind of cipher what are the right tools. That's basically should be your filter for what might be the right tool. It really depends on, for providers, what's the right ROI, and for consumers, what's the right amount of engagement, does that actually move the needle for health? Really interesting. And I'm curious, because as an early stage investor, I mean, you're looking at companies sometimes that are just launching or starting to launch or starting to get product market fit and starting to work out and go to the market. The healthcare industry, especially healthcare software, has been notorious for long sales cycles. Mm-hmm. And it's really hard to sell to providers. On the flip side, it's, if you're a direct consumer, it's hard to keep people engaged. How do you look at, does that change your approach when you're, looking at companies and, you know that it's tough to sell into healthcare and there's longer sales cycles. So I'm just curious, how does that change your outlook at all, or just do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah. Of course, we do prefer shorter sales cycles. And essentially we do invest for return on investment, right? And we do believe shorter sales cycle can help. Even though shorter sales cycle in healthcare is still considered pretty long, just in other B2B segment, and it definitely helps company to really reiterate the concept, refine the products. And which means nowadays, when we look at digital health, a lot of them are actually raising trenches of a seed after seed after seed before meeting the product market fit, which, this is actually very critical impact. But at the same time, there are also ways we've been thinking, how we've been able to help to get it right, trying to help founders to spend less time to walk that extra mile, to help them not to walk that extra mile, and at the same time, I wouldn't say comparatively longer sales cycle will be a deal killer. At the same time, it's really how we see the problem. We still want to see the problem first and see if the commercialization strategy makes sense, and if that's something we really think the problem's bigger, and they tested out different alternatives, and think there's still the right approach in terms of commercialize it, and I do think we'll still pull the trigger. And in terms of sales cycles, and another thing that I want to mention about is that those are the facts you can't get away with. We can only see why, some team will make it through and some team may not, and how different solutions being adopted and procured, and so on and so forth. And what milestones and company needs to meet before that. But looking back, that there are a couple of new players. Self insurance have been a big paying force, and people believe they have a, the sales cycle may be shorter than selling into a payer, which hasn't been proven, but and then the decision making may be more straightforward. They're not like a lot of pushback from on the procurement level, as talking to payer, for example, and you don't have to run a whole load of clinical studies to convince them maybe, and then but now what happened, you see self insurance are flooded with employee focused solutions, and at first they become paying for us, and now it got very competitive when you talk to one of them. It's a big topic. We'll see how it goes in the long run. But to answer your question, it's something we prefer, but are not the key, the deal killer. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, and I suppose sometimes it's for you, when you see value, you can already tell that it's maybe the sales cycle is not going to be as challenging if there's clear value, both either to the patient or the provider.
Right.
I got to talk about the elephant in the room, the pandemic. I'm just curious to get your thoughts on how do you think healthcare is changing because of the pandemic?
Yeah, it's from my perspective, it's definitely changed to a great extent. A lot more people are getting to test out telehealth, virtual care, and more people understand the mental health challenge. Actually, I'm super glad to see that people realize how mental health impact the performance, whether you work as the employee or you're working, you're living with the family under the same roof 24/7, just because you have pandemic kind of putting that constraint on population overall. And I think those are all the great trends we love to see, because the mental health, it deserves a much more look, not only from the society perspective, but also from the payers and payers perspective. Whether we're talking about Medicare, we're talking about private payers. It does impact one's physiological health, absolutely. And then circle back to the telehealth utilization adoptions. We do see the upper limit boundary, because I do believe telehealth is a great tools, but we also think there's a thing that you can't get away from, or not you can't get away, but you can't just match the quality of in-person care, which through the telehealth visit. It's good to for shorter type of Q&A sessions, or a quick diagnostic or therapist for non-urgent or type of issues. But essentially, when you really need to do something, may lead you to surgeries. Do something may lead you to in-person touch experiences. I think the in-person experience still cannot be moved out of the picture. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I feel like it's great that you're kind of aware of, there is this silver lining where it's highlights through the pandemic, that really big push for everyone to move towards digital service, solutions and services. But it's also, I think, great that you have the awareness to know the limitations of those as well, and that it's not all these tools can just completely replace the existing system, and of patient care. And I feel like we're gonna see, we saw that ramp up, and we'll probably see a little bit of a ramp down too as we go back to normal. Really interesting. Well, I'm curious if there's any is there any categories within healthcare post-pandemic that you're looking at, or something that you're excited about?
Mental health is one, as I mentioned before. There's still a lot of problem like within this ecosystem, and we're still trying to find ways to see how we can be helpful to that degree, whether to founders or to other stakeholders. Another place I'm super interested recently is the pediatric care, where solving solutions around with the kids, and where whether behavioral but I guess mostly are behavioral related, whether it's about autism, it's about autism spectrum disorders, and speech, and so on and so forth, and just in general mental health. And I think that's one reason I've been very interested, because just considering how big that challenge to a family, because I actually interviewed parents who says we've spent more than $10K a year just because of our kids out of pocket, just because our kids have that kind of or face that kind of challenge. And then I'm looking at the broader ecosystems, and we currently don't have enough startups to helping kids within that regard, and from monetization perspective, that's definitely something I'd love to see, because direct consumer works within that respect, right? And parents love to spend money with their kids, but overall, I think that's the still untapped market for a lot of entrepreneurs.
Interesting. Yeah, I agree with you. When you look at the ecosystem, you really don't see that many products that are catered to kids. So it'll be really interesting to see how that kind of expands.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the one thing that I do want to bring up is I think the really unique aspects of you and your fund is how active you are with your portfolio. I mean, you almost have to be, being this early stage. And you help guide them through regulation. You'll help them figure out product market fit. I mean, you gave a lot of examples earlier about how you're on the ground talking to customer bases and understanding. I know you have a great network of professionals that you can refer to. And so I think, maybe you want to comment on what that unique aspect of you guys in your fund.
Yeah, it's from a culture wise, we're pretty much a group of nerds, and we love to talk about anything, healthcare related all the time. And our team actually comes from like a very diverse background. We have a pharma people, we got med tech, data scientists, regulatory, finance, primary care, and more. And each of those people, we kind of collaborate on day-to-day basis. We chat a lot, on different issues. But when you think, you have each person with the years of domain expertise and making, discussing and making decisions, brainstorming all together, it does help, us to make, well-rounded decisions from like, evaluation perspective. But also because of that, we have such, close tight network. It also provide a lot of powerhouse to our portfolio in terms of post investment support, and a lot of them are actually pretty hands down, and whether as LPs or team members and or industry, sometimes people call it expert in residency. Yeah, very hands-on.
No, it's pretty cool what you guys offer and how you help your companies. Well, and with that, that was really all the questions that I wanted to ask you, Qi, and before I make any closing remarks, did you have anything that you want to announce or talk about or share with the audience?
Yeah. So first of all, thanks again for mentioning about like, investing preceding seed is very tough. It's a lot of times, we call it rolling the dice, especially, if you're talking about genetic data, right? Like a lot of time, like diagnostic is just rolling the dice at a seed and early seed stage. And then it's a 10 million seed and you put money into it without, just believe the team could do something like you super awesome. And another thing, I think we haven't discussed was I do want to mention about to today's, startups, especially that are trying to do something about, AI and or clinical decision support or anything, diagnostic related. Because, I do came across very often, very, very, very often that they do want to do integration. Their AI actually does make impact on how doctors make their decisions. And mostly like when I ask them questions about regulation, they always tell me like they hired a regular consultant, and based on what they talk to them about, they believe this is a classification, but they ignore the second part, which means most of the times those regulatory guys, they tell them to talk to the FDA. They can get pre-submission pretty quick, and not pretty quick, but pretty much like it's free. And then I think getting that right, getting that as early as possible does help give us a peace of mind, like a peaceful a mind that we know you're taking the patient risk in mind, that you want to be more responsible. And also when you try to talk to doctors, especially whether you want to do a proof of concept study or you want to do like palate and paid palate, when you have all those things lined up, it does help people to feel more comfortable to work with you.
Interesting. No, I think those are really good points, and it's kind of, in a way, it's necessary steps that a lot of companies should be doing, but also de-risk is this idea of the product and what they're trying to prove out for the market. So it definitely makes sense. And it's you can probably also get lost in the lure of something cool like an artificial intelligence tool without realizing that there are real risks when you're making decisions or diagnosis or recommendations about how to deal with somebody's health. So I think that's a really, really good point that you made.
Essentially, like a lot of AI, they're just like working in black box. Doctors, they probably don't understand it, and still don't understand it. And then essentially, your regulators are carrying a lot of responsibility to identify how this works, and then to give you like the stamp, like, okay, cool, you can commercialize, right? And then I often come across like this is a demo showing like hey, we did this and this and this. You click the button, and now here's the scores, and here's the recommendations to doctors, and I'm like, hey, what's your preset meeting looks like? It was like, and they're either telling me our lawyer told us we should be like classified as this, and our regular consultant told us we are classified as this. But have you had a preset meeting, which is free pretty much, and see what's your current progress at?
Interesting. Makes sense. I mean, it definitely makes sense. And well, cool. Well, this is really great. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate it. Again,
thank you for inviting me over again.
Yeah, and for the audience, just to give context of why we did this interview. Qi, CentreGold Capital, the best healthcare VCs out there. Reason why: late stage healthcare venture investing is easy. You're just picking out what really works. You're making the big bets. You're making bold bets. You're making the riskiest bets. You have to be on the ground and like not only in the know of what's happening from idea stage, but also really, really, truly understanding the problem at its core. And then you're taking you're typically, for you, I feel like you're one of the first checks into one of these new companies. And that's really impressive. And you made it work. I mean, you got awesome portfolio companies. You got Virgo, you got Gully Health, you got Circadia, you have a few others that are incredible within the healthcare space. So kudos to you.
Thank you.
I mean, I think you're doing a great job, to be honest with you. And it's actually really cool to be able to feature you at this event. So thank you so much.